Okay, welcome to this third Dapr community call, and we have an agenda for you here. The agenda, which gets posted online, is we're just going to do a few intros again, just to talk about, show you who the core contributors are or maintainers are, just a few intros, and then Young Boo, one of the engineers on the team, is going to give you a little demo of our end-to-end testing framework that we started in the 2.0 release, and we're going to start finishing up in the 3.0 release. Then I'll talk through some of the highlights that have happened in the last couple of weeks. We'll talk about 0.3.0 release. And then, as always, this time is open for anyone to ask any form of questions in any way. You know, we just want to love to hear your thoughts. No question is inappropriate, so you can ask whatever you want. So let me just introduce myself. I'm Mark Fussell. I'm the product manager on Dapr, and maybe a few other core maintainers on the team just introduce themselves, Young Boo and Yaron.
Hi, I'm Yaron, Dapr core maintainer.
Hi, I'm Young Boo. I'm one of the Dapr core maintainer.
Hello, hi, this is Aman, and I'm a Dapr core maintainer as well.
Okay, I think that's good then. Anyone else on the call from the team?
Hi, this is Arthur. I'm also maintaining Dapr.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here, and we're going to hand over to Young Boo, and I'll let you. Are you able to share there?
Sure.
And I'll let you take it away and talk about the end-to-end testing framework that we've put inside Dapr.
I see. Okay, I'm sharing my screen now. What? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
What?
It's got a white line right down the middle.
Sorry.
Split.
Like, oh no. Okay. Can you see my screen?
We can, but it looks like it's reversed, half and half.
Really?
Yes. It's as if the screen is split.
Maybe I need to rejoin. Stop sharing and then. How about this?
That's better. Yes.
Better?
We can see the Dapr repo.
Okay, so in this demo, I'm going to talk about three topics about Dapr E2 test. So first one is to overview of the Dapr E2 test project, Dapr E2 test, and the second thing is that how to run the Dapr E2 test on your local machines and through the CI, and third thing is that how to write the E2 test. So if you go to the Dapr E2 test projects under the Dapr organization, you can see the progress of the Dapr E2 test. And I would like to talk about the Dapr E2 test planning. Initially, we plan to have the 2 iteration. And the first iteration is to implement the test for tools and framework and create at least one E2 test. And also we want to build our CI pipeline for E2 test and provide the documents. I would like to talking about like iteration 1 a little bit more detail later. And then in iteration 2, we plan to implement the Dapr core components E2 test. So focusing only on the positive testing at a kind of a minimum level. So we created 6 work items as issues to implement the E2 test for the Dapr core building block. And also we write the mini specs. And we will implement it soon. And also we are always welcoming to contribution for the writing the E2 test as well. So the next topic that I want to talk about is how to run the E2E test.
I mean, you should explain the goals of the E2E test, yes? The E2E
Yeah.
test is
So
to
basically, the goal of the E2E test is to mimic the end user behavior of to validate the functional functional correctness for Dapr by from deploying the apps to validate it. Yeah.
and these are going to get run when you do builds at check-in time, yes?
Yes, I would like to explain later. I would like to
Okay.
show as a demo. So the next topic is how to run the E2E test. And if you have any questions, just let me know. So next up is how to run the E2E test. So we provided 2 ways to run the E2E test. So you can run the E2E test in your local dev environment, and also you can run the E2E test through the GitHub Action CI. So basically, once you create a PR as a pre-submit test, you can, once you create a PR, and the maintainer will look at the build is okay, and then unit tests are passed, and maintainer will trigger the E2E test through the GitHub Actions. So I would like to walk through and then shows how it works. And so once you change the Dapr code and then you contribute the Dapr core, and then you have to write a unit test and an E2E test, and then you want to run the E2E test on your local machines. So the first thing you have to do is that you have to have the Kubernetes cluster on your, you can use Minikube, or you can use managed cluster such as AKS and JKE. So, but for local cluster, we are supporting only the Minikube. So we discussed supporting the kind and dined, but for this iteration, we are just focusing on supporting the Minikube. So you have to, if you want to use the local cluster, you have to use the Minikube. So to set up the Kubernetes cluster, you can just follow the Dapr setup, Dapr environment setup guideline. And then also you have to install the latest version of Helm version 2. We don't use Helm version 3 now. We will probably supporting Helm version 3 later, but not now. And also you have to have your Docker Hub ID. And then the next thing you have to do is that you have to set the several environment variable. For example, like this one is a Docker Hub registry, the URL, and then this one is the tag, and this one is the namespace which will be used for the test. For this environment variable is required when you use the Minikube. If you use any managed cluster such as like AKS, you don't need to. You should not set this environment variable. And then you have to install the Redis and Kafka for states and PubSub and binding building blocks. We choose the Redis and Kafka as default for testing the state and then PubSub building block. And also to simplify the process to install the Redis Kafka to your cluster, we provided a make command line. So you can use the make file targets to install the Redis and Kafka through the Helm. Once you set up and then install the Redis and Kafka, the next thing you have to build your Dapr runtime changes. So basically, we provided several make command line, and you need to build Linux binaries, and then you will, through this command line, you can build Docker images, and then you can push the Docker image to your Docker registry, the Docker Hub registry, and then this command line will deploy the Docker images to your test cluster. Then your Dapr runtime changes is deployed to the cluster. And the next thing is that, next step is that, so basically, in order to run the E2E test, as I said before, the purpose of the E2E test in Dapr is to validate the functional correctness of Dapr by mimicking end user behavior from deploying app. So in order to implement Dapr E2E test, you have to implement the test app, which is a user app, which will be deployed to the test cluster with the Dapr sidecar. And then the second thing is that you have to implement test driver code. I will explain later how to write the Dapr test app and how to write the Dapr test driver code. So let's say we have the test apps, and then you need to deploy it. You need to build the Docker image for your test app, and then you need to push your test apps to the Docker registry, because we will mimic the end user behavior from deploying the apps to the cluster and running some tests on the cluster. So if you run this, and then you can automatically push the Docker image to the Docker Hub, your Docker Hub. And then next thing is that this step is to register and then apply the default component configuration for testing, such as state store, Redis state store components, and Kafka binding, and Redis pops up. This is the default one. So if you run this command, it is automatically applied these component configuration to your environment. And then the next thing is that this command is to run the actual E2E test. So basically, once you run this test, it will basically run the Go test. And then test is started, the test will deploy the test apps and then start the E2E test. I will explain more later in the next when we discuss about how to write the E2E test. So let me show how to run it. So let's say I already set up. I already run these command line before meeting to save the time. So if you just run the make E2E all, and then it will start test, and then yeah, there's a one test name is called like Hello Dapr. You can see the tests are all passed, and yeah, it's already cached, unfortunately. So
I have a question.
Yes.
So if you don't run any of the previous commands and just run the make test E2E all, will also recursively call all the previous commands, or you have to run all of them manually one by one?
So basically, if you just change like test driver code, you can just run E2E. Yeah, sorry. So you have to, so let's say if you change the test app, then you don't, you have to build your test apps and then push to your test apps. But you don't need to like run these commands again.
I think the question is there a single script that you can run that sets it all up for you?
Yep.
Is there?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
I think the question is there a single script that you can run that just sets this all up for you?
We don't have.
Okay.
Okay. I'll take a look at that later. If there's
Yeah.
a way to make a make target that will run all the previous make file, make targets optionally.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
So, and then, so next scenario is that how to run the E2E test through the GitHub Actions. So basically, once we created the PR, and then the maintainer will review the PR, and then maintainer will check if the build is done, and then unit tests are passed, and then maintainer will trigger the E2E test by adding the OK to test command to the pull request. So in order to implement this, actually we don't create like another CI pipeline such as Dapr. We decided just to using existing build pipeline, GitHub Actions, to keep the build infrastructure simple and make the maintain of the pipeline easier. For now, we are just using the GitHub Actions workflow to run the E2E test on CI. So let's say I would like to. So let's say like maintainer found that like unit tests are all passed, and then we can just maintainer will just run the OK to test. Then it will trigger the workflow, GitHub workflow, and then it takes some time. And then you will trigger the E2 test workflow. So for CI, actually, we are using AKS cluster to validate our to validate it E2 to run the E2 test.
How many tests are there at the moment then, Youngbu? There's just the one?
Test what? Sorry.
How many tests, end-to-end tests, are there at the moment?
So right now, this is just one test.
Okay.
We are, I mean, in the second iteration, we will add more tests for each core building block.
I have two U3 tests on my plate now. Sure, great. Okay.
Yep. So. Yep. Any question on this? Okay. So how to write the E2E test? Then I would like to use a VS Code to explain how to write the E2E test. As I mentioned before, the purpose of the E2E test is to mimic the end user behavior from deploying the apps to and then validated the functionality of Dapr. So in order to do that, actually, we need to implement two things. First one is test app, which is very simple, the HTTP server. Well, listening to 3000 port and then exposing some test endpoints. And then the second thing is that we need to implement test driver code, which is a normal Go test code. Yeah, I would like, and then, yeah, let's take a look at in detail now. So if you go to the Dapr repo, and there's a test/apps directory, you can find the test apps here. So right now we only have one test app. We would like to use as this app as a kind of a boilerplate for the new test app. So if you look at the Hello Dapr test app, there's 3 files. The first file is the app.go, which is a simple Go HTTP server. So, to write the test apps, actually, we recommend you to use Go. Technically, you can use any language to write the test app, but to keep the code base consistent and to make easier to leverage the same codes to create a new test app, we really recommend you to use Go.
Yeah, I just want to add that for writing test cases for the runtime, we'll be using Go, but for writing test cases for language specific SDKs, we'll be using that language to write the test cases.
Yes. But for that particular case, except for that particular case, actually, we want to use the Go for testing runtime. So, and then the next file is the Docker file. Docker file is to use to build the Docker image of this Hello Dapr app. And then the third one is the service.yaml. Service.yaml is to use only for development purpose of test app. Basically, this YAML file will not be used by actual eDOI test. So our test runner framework in the test driver code basically generated the Kubernetes deployment objects to deploy the test app to cluster. So basically, we don't use this service.yaml in the actual test. But when you're developing the test app, you probably want to validate your test app manually on your Kubernetes cluster or locally. So you can use this YAML file for this purpose to deploy your test app to your cluster manually through the kubectl. So let's take a look at the app.go. Oh, that's not that real. So I changed something. It should be here. Oh no, this is wrong. So it's correct. So let's take a look at main method. So if you look at this code, actually, it is very simple Go HTTP server. It is exposing two endpoints. One is for the index endpoint, which will be used for status check by the test driver code. So basically, once the test driver code deployed this app to Kubernetes, test driver will check the test app is deployed completely, and then it will check the Dapr sidecar is injected correctly, and also it will check the test app endpoint is up and running. So this endpoint is used for that purpose. And then the second endpoint is a test endpoint, which is kind of a test trigger. In test driver, test driver want to validate Dapr runtime sidecar's functionality, it will call this endpoint, and then the handler in this test app will call the Dapr sidecar runtime API through gRPC or like HTTP. So we recommend to expose to at least to this to use this endpoint for all test apps to be consistent. So any questions on this? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when we're building new tests, are the app specific for a single E2E test, or can the same app be reused for multiple tests?
So it depends on, I mean, the test app can be used by multiple test driver. If we already have, I mean, if you can find the like the kind of functions that you want to test in the other test app, you can use that existing, you can use the existing test app.
Okay, and if we have to make a small modification to existing app to support a new test, is that okay as well?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Good. So the implementation of those get and post methods, are they up further, just higher up? The actual test itself?
Sorry, I didn't.
You've got in the implement the actual what gets called on your code for those two methods. Where do you actually write the actual test handler itself?
So that's I mean, this handler is just to so basically this endpoint will be called by like test driver, actual test driver code,
Yeah.
and then handler will, I mean, it depends on how you write the code, how you write the test. So handler will do some like tests, do some kind of the test scenarios by calling the Dapr runtime API, or it depends on how you write it.
I just think that you got green test, blue test there.
Yeah, it's just like just yeah, it's just like returning the response. So it doesn't. This code doesn't really use the Dapr runtime API. So yep. And then the next thing you have to do is that you have to write the test driver code. So if you look at the EDE directory, there's a EDE, the test driver code is a typical the Go test.
Yes.
So you can just follow the best practice of Go test, Go practice, and then if you look at this test code, so this test code, like a test driver code, will deploy the test apps to the test cluster, and then it will check, as I said before, we'll check the test app is deployed completely, and then Dapr sidecar is injected correctly. And then also, this test code should clean up the test apps and other kind of test resources. So to simplify that process, and also we want test writer to focus only on their own tests, we created a test runner framework. So the test runner framework basically maintained, the purpose of test runner is to maintain the whole test life cycle. But for now, it does test runner just maintaining the test apps life cycle. So once you once the test is started, if you specify the list of the test, then the test runner is automatically deploy your test apps to cluster. And then once test is done, and then test runner is just clean up all the test resources and test apps automatically. So let's take a look at in detail in this code. So test driver code should start with a build test tag. A build tag should be build EDE. It should be start with the EDE build tag, because we don't want to run this test when we are running a unit test. So we are using the iterative test for test driver code. Then, if you look at this method, this test method is a go test main entry point. So once go test is started, it will call the main test main, and then we need to define which test that we will use for the whole test. So if you look at this, if you define the list of the test that which will be used for this test, and then you can pass this array to the new test runner method to create a test runner instance. And then after creating a test runner instance, you can just run the test runners as start method. And then once you call this start method, test runner deployed the predefined test apps to the test cluster, and then run all tests starting with the test prefix method, and then once all tests is done, the test runner clean up the test apps and then other test resources.
So just so I'm clear, where do you actually write your tests, the actual tests themselves?
So basically this one, so as I said before, we will use the Go test framework. We will use the Go test. So in Go test, you can like write a test, actual test, func, like, and test some, you can just write the function starting with the test, and then you can write the actual test here.
Okay, so that's your test code that you're going to write.
Yes.
Whatever the test code is. Okay.
Right.
I think that's pretty what people really kind of want to get. It's like there's this whole framework in place. I create a new name of my test, my Dapr.test, and I write the test.myDapr test inside here, and whatever the test code is that tests your particular functionality. Yes?
Yep.
Okay.
So for this test, actually, we only have the one test method, and then also let's say so as I said before, the test app is the simple HTTP server, and then we deploy it before Go test call this method. Test runner deploy the test app to your test cluster, and then in order to use that test app, we have to call the endpoint exposed by the test app. To call that endpoint, we have to get the ingress and external ingress external URL for that particular app. We provide a helper method to get the external URL, your external IP address of the particular test app. You can, if you call this helper method, then with the particular app name, then it returns the external IP address, and then you can to run the actual test, you can just call the endpoint using the external URL.
Okay, Young Boo, I do want to give a chance for people to ask questions, so you need to start wrapping this up. So, Are we done, or what else do you want to cover? Because we've only got 20 minutes.
I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to final say?
Nope.
Okay. So any other questions that people want to ask Young Boo while he's finishing up on this? Or okay. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to switch back from your screen then now. Thank you for that. That was good stuff. Good. So we've got 20 minutes here. I just wanted to kind of share. Thank you for that. I just wanted to share a couple more things here at the moment. If I just share my screen. So getting back to our agenda. So So good, thank you. So when you write your test, use the end-to-end testing framework. We'll be adding some more tests over the next few weeks to show how more of them written. I wanted to kind of do a shout out for a few things that have happened over the last couple of weeks in terms of things that have happened inside the contributions. We've had quite a few people contribute different types of state stores for us. So GCP Firestore, Couchbase, and MongoDB are now inside the contributors library. Just this morning, we had someone help us build out an AWS secret store manager. So that complements the Key Vault one that we have in Azure and also the local Kubernetes one. So you can store your secrets that are external to your configuration and pull them down from the secret store inside them all. And also, in the last check-in that happened in the current release, you now have service discovery as a component. So if you actually go and look at the contribs repo at the moment, you'll see that we've actually organized this thing a little bit better. You see that service discovery actually is its own component type now inside here. So we got Kubernetes and DNS servers as a way of resolving those discoveries for the how to call onto from one service to another. We've also organized our bindings directory as well inside here. You'll see that before it was a little bit flat, where the AWS, Azure, and GCP bindings were all in this flat hierarchy. We've put them in a tree now. So now here, these are the GCP bindings. Here's the Azure bindings, for example, to blob storage, to Cosmos DB, and then the AWS ones inside here to S3, SQS, and DynamoDB. That's for your binding triggers. And equally as well, if you go into the state stores inside here, we've done a similar thing inside here. So now you actually have GCP Firestore inside here, HashiCorp Console, Azure Cosmos DB. So that's just a little bit of a reorganization to make it clear about where they came from. So that's all good stuff. So thank you for all those contributions. Next up, I just want to talk about that we decided that we're going to have another release before the year ends. So we're actually just working on the 0.30 release at the moment, and we're targeting getting this out for the end of next week. So it's going to be a bit of a holiday this week here, but for the 6th of December, we're going to get another build and drop out to include the 0.30 release of the Dapr runtime. That will almost certainly include the release of the CLI as well as probably our SDK, such as the .NET SDK. And to a large extent, it will include all of these test cases and the end-to-end testing framework that Youngwoo just went through. There's some fixes we've done inside a few cleanups in terms of just the runtime itself, as well as just improving some of the samples and also that cleanup I just showed you inside the contrib. So we're pretty excited just to be able to have something that we can have a new release just before the break in the holidays that we're targeting for the end of next week. At that point, we have about 15 minutes left. That's everything I just wanted to cover about where we are right now. As we get into the new year or next year, we'll probably go quiet for a couple of weeks towards the end of this year, and then we'll kick off again, pulling in, creating another milestone for a 0.4 release next year, and probably at the next community call, we'll have an update on our roadmap about what we're going to try and focus on. So, for example, one area we're looking at focusing a little bit more of our attention on is that we've had a lot of asks from different people in the community is, can you improve some of the Java SDK and some of the Java documentation and samples? So we're looking about how we can focus on that at the moment. And you'll probably see a little bit more of our attention on that, just to make sure that we, for example, bring some of the actor capabilities into the Java SDK in a similar way we have them inside the .NET SDK. So, but I think at the next community call, which is on the 10th of December, we'll have a little bit more clarity about some of the roadmap, and we'll update you on that. Good. So at this point, because I'm sure there's maybe a chance for people to ask questions, I wanted to just open this up and give a chance for anyone who's on the call to ask any questions that they have, no matter what it is, whether it's about a PR, whether it's about a roadmap, whether it's about issue, or just a general question about what's happening with the Dapr project for a while. So feel free either just to open up your mic and just ask you that way, or post it in the chat window, and that way we can just hear some of your thoughts and some of your ideas. So please go ahead if you have some questions.
Hey everyone, it's David. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, it's exciting to see all the progress you've made in such a short amount of time. So thank you for that. For my question or comment is more about Helm 3. And I know I was going through issue 793, and I understand that we're not going to be updating the charts for Helm 3, but maybe the documentation should be updated a little bit to use just the client. Because imagine if you're someone new to that space, you're going to kind of bump into some issues there going through it. So last night I was running into it a little bit, able to work around it with Helm install and just point exactly to the repo, and it worked. And I was just worried that maybe the docs, if they're not reflecting that too, we could have maybe a lower adoption or a little bit of a bumpy ride in the beginning for some folks.
Yeah. I mean, did you go through it, and were there changes to the docs that you could suggest based upon your experience?
Yeah. I'm definitely not a Helm expert, but I did get it working with Helm 3. So I did write a little comment at 793, but I do think it's something that should be updated soon, just because folks who are upgrading are going to run into it.
Yeah, this is a good point. Is there anything you want to comment on this, Yaron?
Yeah, I think we should update the docs with Helm 3 equivalents differently.
Yes. I'll tell you what, David, if there's anything you could post about your experience against that's some suggestions, and put it in the comments on 793 issue, and then let's see what we can do to get those docs updated for our release by the end of next week. Because I think you're right. With Helm 3 coming out, Helm 3 has been shown to be pretty popular about those changes. Supposedly makes your life a lot easier in terms of the install from the client side. So yeah, we agree with you. So let's get your put your comments into that issue, and then we'll do as much as we can, see if we can pull it in for the release for the end of next week.
You got it.
Okay, any other questions people would like to put out there in terms of, on roadmap or?
How does Dapr relate to Azure Service Fabric?
How does it relate to Service Fabric? So Dapr is a programming model that will allow you to be able to deploy it on any different type of platform. So right now, the two implementations we have is that you can run Dapr on your local machine, and in other words, you can write your code, and for example, you can do service-to-service invocation, taking advantage of local host calls, and we've done a set of services that get deployed into a Kubernetes environment, so that you can actually deploy Dapr inside a Kubernetes environment. That includes things like the sidecar injection things, where Dapr can and will be able to be deployed onto a Service Fabric cluster. What that requires, though, is that, in fact, one of the pieces of work that I just pointed out that we had to get done was making the service discovery as its own component, because it wasn't its own component until a week and a half ago. So effectively now you can plug, for example, that service discovery component in to map down to the Service Fabric discovery, Service Fabric naming service, or effectively it has a reverse proxy on each one of the machines, so you can actually take advantage of the platform's service discovery mechanism. So the answer is you, and in fact, last week, I don't know if you can, if Leon's on the call, we showed how you can actually just package up Dapr into a Service Fabric application and deploy it, and take advantage of at least some of the capabilities, like the trigger mechanism, just by running Dapr as a separate as a code package with inside the application that gets deployed. Our goal is to make sure that Service Fabric Dapr does run on Service Fabric first class, and we'll get there when we're coming up with a design for that. But it's going to probably be next year that you'll actually see a design and get it deployed. So to answer your question is, Dapr will eventually be able to be deployed on top of Service Fabric. We just need to work through building the components that allow us to do that as a first-class experience, such as service discovery.
Yeah, so just want to add to that, we get that question a lot about Dapr and Service Fabric. Like Mark said, Dapr is a programming model where SF is an orchestrator, and Dapr can run on any orchestrator. For V1, we are targeting Kubernetes, so that we provide first-class integration with Kubernetes. But that being said, Dapr can run on Service Fabric or any other orchestrator. It's just that it would need more configurations for running Dapr on those platforms.
You shouldn't think of Dapr as a replacement Service Fabric. Dapr still needs to run on a hosting activation platform, such as Kubernetes or Service Fabric or Swarm or Mesosphere, or any of these other ones that actually provide a hosting activation experience for a set of processes or containers.
Can Dapr spread across multiple orchestrators, for example, multiple Kubernetes clusters or a Kubernetes cluster and a Service Fabric cluster?
Sorry, were you asking a question? Can I deploy Dapr across different types of clusters?
Let's say I have two components. One is deployed into Kubernetes, and the other one is deployed, let's say, to either to a different Kubernetes cluster or to Service Fabric.
Yes. So, are you asking, will I be able to do kind of cross-cluster calls between services? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes. Eventually, that's on our roadmap, but we don't have that yet in any way. So, that requires us effectively being able to call. Today, Dapr, in terms of its service invocation mechanism, only takes advantage of being able to do service invocation with inside a single cluster. Yes, so in other words, in Kubernetes, it takes advantage of DNS. On Service Fabric, it can take advantage of the naming service inside that. On Docker Swarm, it would be inside the DNS. If you're asking, is there a goal that I can call from service A in cluster 1 to service B in cluster 2, that's sort of something that we do want to put on the roadmap, but we don't have that yet. Is that your question?
Yep, that was my question. You answered it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's kind of a multiple namespaces, calling services across multiple namespaces. Although it would be good to kind of understand your scenario for that, because it is a little bit unusual in the sense of, you will have to have, it'd be good to understand. We always like to hear the scenario behind it all in terms of
Mark?
Why you want to do it.
Mark?
Yes.
Arthur. In one of my previous employers, each organization had their own DevOps and their own infrastructure. So it was very common for the financial department to have their own Kubernetes cluster, and then the ordering system have their own Mesosphere cluster. So it depends on the size of the company. Different parts of the company might use different technologies. So that's might not be that uncommon. That's my perception.
Well, but also we see things like people expose API endpoints as well. As another way of doing this all. So it's not just necessarily service to service direct calls, but also there's usually some sort of other API gateway between them as well. So it's just
so the calls from one cluster goes to the ingress of the service on another cluster.
Yes.
Yeah, we also heard this, Mark, from a customer we've been talking to, where they wanted this feature, where Dapr can actually make the lives a lot easier, by taking the burden off of creating these ingresses and taking care of mutual authentication between different clusters and providing secured point-to-point communication.
Yes.
And, when you have several, applications in one cluster with an identity, with a Dapr identity, it can be very beneficial to create this, universal namespace thing where you can just discover and call different services and different clusters as if they were running locally inside your own cluster.
Yes.
Yeah, and also want to add that with service discovery made a component, You can conceptually have another component which can discover your services running inside another clusters, and then calls can be forwarded to that.
Mark, there's a question in chat. Do you see that?
But it was, can you let David Kober back in, which I just did.
All right. Cool.
Okay, good. Other questions?
Hi, this is Renat speaking. So from I understand we kind of focusing on because the product or the model itself is in the very early stages, but I feel that they will be really beneficial to showcase how you can take the legacy application and do the migration into the Dapr model. And the good example may be the eShop on containers, which is reference architecture, again, managed by another group in Microsoft and community. Yes. So if you can take this, for example, and basically say, okay, these are the steps that you have to take in order to move it out into the Dapr, and not just basically say show point A and point B, but intermediate steps. And if you do that, that will be a really powerful statement for the completeness of the model, Dapr itself. And also it would answer a lot of questions that people may have. Okay, what if I have a brownfield project that I need to migrate into Dapr? I'm really interested because I'm in this situation when I'm kind of, looking at the technical side, but I have a kind of several projects that are running today, which might benefit from Dapr, but I'm hesitant to bring in the technology right now in there because I don't have too many answers to a lot of questions.
I see. So I think what you're saying is, wouldn't it be nice to see a larger solution such as the eShop application that has a number of different types of services inside of it all, both stateless and stateful, and show how when you Dapperized that project, the benefits that you got from it?
Yes, this is correct. Yes.
Yeah, and we fully agree with you here. In fact, another one that's also been suggested is that Google also has one called the Hipster application, where they also have a similar sort of project that has it's a shopping cart like application where it's all written in different languages, some in Go, some in Python, some in C#. And we actually sort of started to go down the path of migrating some of that application over. It's taking, those things take a little bit of time, that's all. But it's a very good suggestion, and it's certainly something that we want to get to. We've just got to figure out when or how we can get it onto the roadmap of doing some of the work, or maybe there's someone who can help us do that side of things, but do some of that work. But you're certainly correct that it would show a more extensive solution rather than sort of individual just pieces of features to show a larger app like the eShop application. So yes, we would like to do that. We're just not too sure when we can get to it, but I think it would help a lot.
Thank you.
Okay to pop in for a question?
Yes, jump in. We got a couple of minutes left. Ask whatever, whatever you want.
Thanks, Mark. Where I live, there's a power failure at least twice a week. So sorry about that. In the actor model, is there any plan to bring the Service Fabric style actor events to it as well? Because that was the most useful feature in Service Fabric.
Actually, the Service Fabric actor events were not reliable and they were not guaranteed. They were best effort. So the events will not be brought forward to this new Dapr actor model. Instead, we will be exposing PubSub between actors and services in the Dapr model.
Okay, that kind of doesn't make sense how you use them together. And by the way, I never lost an event ever in Service Fabric with actor events.
And they are best effort, and you could lose them. That's the reason that they are best effort. But the events would not be brought forward to Dapr actors. Events was very specific to the way calls are being made in Service Fabric using remoting.
Is your scenario though, David, that you just want to do trigger a pub sub event from one service, from one actor to another?
No, it would be more like, for example, you've got a web API that's using SignalR, and kind of the exact same way I did it in Service Fabric, and you want an actor to be able to send something back when something completes, but to the right instance of the thing using SignalR, where I just came up with a trick that I use on connected and on disconnected to create a dictionary of objects that basically hold the actor proxy and therefore the callback. So the callback knows what the client ID of the SignalR connection is, and that way it just automatically gets routed to the right instance of the web API app.
I see. So your scenario was that you wanted one actor calls another one, and then you call back over SignalR to the one that called you.
Well, no, when something asynchronously happens that the actor's monitoring, it's able to get it to the right client connection, because the actual proxy object is created, on the SignalR on connect event and destroyed on the on disconnected event. And that would also be a perfect model for Blazor as well.
Actually, they want the event to be sent to the client who made the call, so it can be notified based on something happening in the actor. But that's inherent to how Service Fabric communication worked. And Dapr actors, there is we are not storing where the client was, and there is, I mean, the functionality is not there yet. We can look into adding that, but our initial plan was not to enable that. Instead, we were hoping that PubSub should be able to help you there. If it's not able to help you there, we can chat more about it.
Yeah, it'd be good to talk through the SignalR scenario that you have. So it's SignalR back to the client that called it, yes?
Well, yeah, I'm actually looking at using an old trick in something new. So that's why Dapr, I'm looking more at Dapr than Service Fabric, because there are some severe limitations that don't make it ideal in some cases. So the equivalent way of doing that, whether it be, something that's Blazor based and there's multiple instances of it running, where a single instance of a Blazor session, then in that case you would store it in a scoped, service, the connection details and the actor proxy. But just having that kind of mechanism so that the real-time updates go to the right thing.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I think what we should do is let's start a thread. Let's start an issue on this and start to discuss it, because we actually have been talking to the Blazor guys about what does Dapr like with Blazor, and they did mention talking about taking advantage of SignalR to do some of those things. So I think we should just walk through the scenario and understand what it's like. So maybe we can start an issue on this and have that conversation.
And also look into it, if how it cannot be, why it cannot be done with PubSub.
Well, the problem with PubSub is if there's multiple instances of the thing, there's no guaranteed which instance is going to receive which subscription is going to receive the event.
Okay.
And you want to make sure it's targeted to the right instance, because if you have 10 instances of, a SignalR endpoint API, Blazor, or anything, you need to make sure that what it's interested in, something happening, inside of an actor asynchronously, a completion to something, it's something it needs to notify back to, that may be context specific to a user. So the two cases are a SignalR hub connection and a server-side Blazor app with a scoped service that you would want to be the container of that, of the proxy object.
Okay, let's start an issue and start a discussion inside here, and we'll maybe have to do another call with you or figure something out about where we can go with this. So, but it's
I find it very hard to believe I'm the only person that has that requirement, considering a lot of this came out of you know, requests from the Azure IoT team to be able to use actors, and it doesn't seem like they could use it very well without that scenario.
I mean, let's start with opening an issue on GitHub, and then let's track there.
Because we're out of time. We're a little bit out of time now. I've run over past 11 o'clock, so I want to be conscious of everyone's time. So, good. So, yes, thanks, Dave. Well, let's do that in an issue and start talking through that all. At this point, I'm going to close the call down, and we'll see you again on the 10th in 2 weeks' time. So, 10th of December, and that'll be our one, probably the last one for the rest of the year. But you know, feel free to post issues, you know, inside the repo, and you reach out to us on Gitter. If you go to our community Gitter channel, you can always post questions on there, and we can follow up and dive into details a little bit more. Okay, thank you, everyone, and see you in 2 weeks.